Good evening, Superintendent Hurst, President Christian, and board trustees. It's great to be invited back to deliver part 2.2 of the equity assessment. My name is Cheryl Hiblin, and I'm the president of the Illuminate Ed Collective, an education consulting group contracted by the superintendent to conduct an equity assessment within your district. I want to make sure that I acknowledge that your district is continuing to weather the COVID crisis. And I know that the timing of delivering the remainder of these findings is likely falling on exhausted ears. I will do my best to move quickly through the material so that the equity assessment is closed and the strategic planning can begin. As a reminder, there are multiple findings within the equity assessment. And all of these findings fall under three overarching themes: a need for universal system structures and alignment, a need for attention, adequate attention to equity, access, and achievement, and a need for effective communication processes. Last November, I delivered the first half of these findings. Just as a reminder, we discussed that there is a need to address achievement and achievement gaps between student groups. There is a need to clarify the West Contra Costa way. There is a need to develop, strengthen, and support relationships across the system that are rooted in the context of student learning. There is a need to transform policies into actionable procedures. There is a need to develop and monitor accurate and timely data sets that are aligned with desired student learning outcomes. And there is a need to create systems that move from planning to execution. And at the end of my last presentation, we really talked about how critical it is. We do a lot of planning in a district, but execution is when our teams are functioning in a cadence of accountability with each other, not just from the top down. So I'm going to start tonight with finding 7. And the ranking of these findings doesn't necessarily mean that one is more important than another. I would say this is a very important finding. There is a need for master schedule oversight. And let me just start by defining a little bit by what I mean by a master schedule. Middle schools and high schools use this word to describe the embodiment of their fiscal and human priorities in a schedule. So basically, this is where we make decisions about how our money and our people are going to wrap around our desired student outcomes, not for years to come. Of course, these things go on for years, but how are we going to make an impact in the upcoming 10 months? So this is a process that occurs at the sites, but I do think there needs to be a healthy checks and balances in the oversight of master schedules in the district. So my recommendations are that you complete a course of study review to really find out what courses are in your district and how are they being used. When I did my analysis, there was little to no evidence that master schedules are reviewed in West Contra Costa to ensure that the fiscal and human resource allocation of schedules is equitable and financially responsible. Master schedules, the grids, could not be produced centrally. Now, I was able to get some grids out of the technology department, but not the kind of grids that a site would use and you might hand out to a teacher or the public to make sense of what is being taught, when it's being taught, and who is experiencing what in the schedule. The technology division also shared with me that this is just not something that they had been asked to produce previously. So, you know, this may be a process that West Contra Costa will want to put in place. Despite COVID, There's no evidence that master schedule review has been part of the position control process or beginning of the year staffing adjustments. And you can imagine master schedules. How do you determine whether or not requests for additional teachers or additional, an additional math teacher, an additional resource teacher, the master schedule of the school that shows how many kids are enrolled by section, who's teaching, that should be it should be cast up on the screen in a position control conversation, and people should be making decisions based on whether they see that relationship between fiscal responsibility and how human and fiscal resources are being used. And whether or not the site does in fact need more, or whether they need to make adjustments in their existing schedules. While the course of study does not appear to be expansive, and the course of study is your list, your repertoire of courses, your lists of courses, there are variations in the way courses are being sequenced and the course numbers and titles that are being used. These are variations in the roadmap, and variations are what lead to potential inequities. Our best intentions with the way we name a course or the way that we sequence a course has implications in the way we use those sequences or the way we assign kids into those courses. And that's why the checks and balances between the site and the district are so important. The use of ethnic studies coursework is an example of an area that could be monitored in the master schedule by site and student group to monitor equity outcomes. There are no published master schedule expectations. So there's no document that is given to the sites that gives them the parameters by which master schedules should be aligned to the district's vision, mission, and equity statement, frankly. There isn't any evidence of master schedule tracking of enrollment and effectiveness of support classes for English learners, special education, and other students who need preventative and tier 1 aligned supports. And I'll be honest with you, it should be a red flag if there are more intervention courses in the master schedule and remediation courses in the master schedule than there are preventative measures in the master schedule. So if you see more, oh, this student failed something, they need to take this, or this student didn't score high enough on something, so they need to take this, but you don't see preventative measures like a support class to pass physics before they fail it, that should be a red flag. And so let's just take a look at the recommendations. So look at your courses, do a review of them, not just names and titles, but who is experiencing which courses, and is it equitable? How are sites using their courses? I would develop a committee, and that committee should be very diverse and make recommendations to the board about courses that need to be eliminated, revised, or added. I would revise the graduation procedures outlined in the 1819 Principals Handbook to clearly reflect a course progression aligned to equity efforts. And what I mean by that is you should set a standard for what you're promising any child who comes into West Contra Costa. What is that equitable core going to look like? And any deviation from that equitable core, there should be a process. That shouldn't just happen because someone might think that a kid can't do something. Our mindset needs to be that they can if we give them the proper supports. And there needs to be that relationship between a growth mindset and how the system works alongside principals and schedulers to have those adaptive conversations with staff throughout the process. Another recommendation is to provide base staffing projections and allocations. So there should be certain things that every site receives regardless, and then it should be supplemented. but everyone should have some level of base staffing and allocations. And those staffing allocations and base priorities, those need to be a priority in your hiring process. So if everyone's entitled to a certain amount of counselors, you've got to fill those counseling positions before all of the extras, so that the kids are experiencing and having the supports that they need each year at the base level. I would also recommend that supplemental base allocations be defined by student learning needs. So if you're going to give sites X number of additional dollars, that should be tied to a particular need that you're seeing through some type of data that is being collected. So if a particular site doesn't need support in closing, let's say, reading gaps, maybe you're not allocating that kind of money down. But if a site does, what is that going to look like? And how is that money going to be tied directly to that 10-month cycle of change that you're going to implement with those supplemental funds? I would also use data to create master schedule expectations. People need to understand what those expectations are when they build, and those expectations need to be co-created with them. I would measure master schedule expectations as a part of board reporting. So how many sites after they built and after they allocated, do we see any fluctuations away from what we set as our master schedule expectations? And if so, what are we doing to take corrective action? I would make master schedule review a part of the position control process. I would evaluate master schedule class size at the beginning of the year to balance accordingly. And this is hugely important. When you have a class size of 25, but you are only setting or scheduling 8 kids into that class, think about the money that is being lost in those unfilled seats and what you could do with those funds if those seats were either filled or that money was allocated differently. So I would really look at numbers and whether sites are filling to the union guideline capacity. I would also manage a balance between compliance and academic fiscal outcomes. So sometimes we do things in the master schedule because a mandate comes or an assembly bill is signed. And of course, when something is law, we need to do it. But I also think that we need to know who we are. We know, the West Contra Costa way, we know best practice. And before we just blanket down mandates in the master schedule, we need to think through their impacts, strategize how to best implement mandates that are coming from the state or the federal government, and make sure that we're calling our state or federal partners to ask questions if we don't truly understand what we're allowed to do. Too many times in master schedules, we just see things done because, oh, well, we have to do that, it's the law, without thinking about the impacts to course progressions or the equitable experience of all kids. And we really need to think through that carefully before those decisions are made. And this is just a slide that shows we need to use our data each year, right? That student learning based data to tell us, like, what is it that we need to do in our master schedule expectations to make sure that we're giving proper guidance to what those parameters are when we build, and then supporting staff with professional learning if we make any changes in the master schedule that require shifts. And of course, we're doing all of this in partnership with our sites, with our unions. And so there shouldn't be any surprises as we go through this process. And then accountability, this isn't that top-down accountability where, you're hitting them with a hammer. This is that accountability where people have been immersed in such a supportive process that they start to manage themselves in the process, and they start to see that the master schedule can truly be a lever for equity. This is just an example of what master schedule expectations can look like. So let's say that your data told you that not everyone had access to A to G. So a master schedule expectation might be all students will be scheduled into A to G courses needed for graduation. You know, if you saw that assessment and intervention support was an area of need, you might put in as a master schedule expectation that before students are placed in interventions, that diagnostic data is reviewed and that those interventions are built within the school day and that they're connected to the tier 1 environment and potentially taught by the tier 1 teacher. So whatever the data is telling you, you transform those into your master schedule building parameters. And so this is I have multiple slides that show that in my former district, we had a lot of areas that we provided guidance around because we could see in the data that these were areas of need. And I know this slide is going to cause a little bit of a rumble. It already did when I originally showed it to the district. But what you're seeing on this screen, and I'm sure this has changed now since it's been a few months, but I asked folks that work with me to run sections below 10. And I just started looking at how many sections at each school were had kid enrollment numbers below 10 in each class, which is significant. Let's say your class size is 25, you only have 10 in a class, that's 15 unused seats. That's a lot of financial, that's a lot of finance not being utilized. So I do want to say that some of these sections are layered. So what you'll find in some of these schools is that they don't actually have, like Betty Reed might not actually have 18 sections of 10. They might have a few sections that are layered. The point of showing this slide, though, is that you should run this and you should look at this and you should see how many empty seats you have, because that has a direct correlation to staffing and a direct correlation to your budgeting. So examining this data is hugely important. And these sections that I originally queried, some are English learner sections, right? Some are special education sections, but you'll find that some of these sections, they're just under enrolled. And I've provided the superintendent with a spreadsheet of each school in every period. If you add the number of underfilled seats against what a full class should be at secondary, there's a cost savings, a potential cost savings here of millions of dollars. And so I think that you really need, maybe IT could build you just a really particular report that you could run regularly to see how under-enrolled your courses actually are. And, you know, in the union guidelines and in your side letters, there's going to be guidance on what those course maximums should be. So you've already got that worked out. This is just a matter of going in and looking to see what's actually happening. And that's why master schedule oversight is so important. Okay, finding number 8 is the need for the Educational Services Division to integrate instructional efforts across sites and centrally. And I want to be really transparent about this. In interviews, site visits, and through student data that I collected, it really revealed that special education and English learner efforts need to be aligned to the instructional core. In the 1920 and 21 big events PD calendar, departments are invited to add their individual department events to the sheet. This is evidence of a technical request, like add your items, rather than an integrated approach to professional learning. Although the balanced literacy plan clearly shows the connections to the instruction of ELs and special education students, There's no evidence that integrated sessions were provided to support the idea that all kids are general education students. Balanced literacy is good for all of them. And here are some examples of how special education accommodations and EL standards can be integrated into this model. So let me share just for a second. This is the Leaky Pipeline. And one of the things that we did in my former district in San Diego Unified is we went back and looked at one graduating class of students, and this happens to be 2016. So at the beginning of the pipeline in their kindergarten class, we saw 10,268 kids. But at the end of the 2016 cohort, we saw 6,267 graduates. Now we know, especially in the San Diego region, people leave, they move to other states. But the interesting thing about the data in San Diego Unified is we could have predicted everyone that left us for charters, didn't make it to graduation on time. We could have predicted them all in third grade based on how they scored on their reading assessments. And so we traced across 2016, wow. So the success of students was predictive at third grade. And then we started to see suspensions and behavior start to become more of an issue in 7th grade. And then in 10th grade, we started to see attendance problems. So what we learned from this particular study of one cohort of kids was that if we went back now and looked at who was struggling in third grade and just how they had performed on similar measures, we actually might be able to interrupt and monitor what happened to the kids that we knew would be predictive on the other end. And so this was really important because what we learned was special education and English learner students who were pushed out of tier 1 instruction into a lot of separate but equal situations it was really predictive about what would happen with some of them. On the positive side, what we saw in the pipeline is that more English learners who were actually reclassified outperformed their English speaking peers, which is pretty amazing and really shows you how important it is to get kids reclassified. So in West Contra Costa, what I saw were that some of the EL and special education messaging was deeply rooted in silos of compliance. And I'm not saying that compliance isn't important. Of course, we need to follow the rules that state and federal, those guidelines. But when you're leading with the mandate, instead of strategizing how to utilize your master schedule or your planning strategically so that the mandate is in support of preservation of your tier 1 environment and kids having the opportunity to have college and career readiness similar to peers who don't have IEPs or peers who speak English fluently. In your federal program monitoring assessment from 1920, there was a real alignment in that document for a need for English learner alignment in your system. There were also significant achievement gaps between EL, special education, and their peers in your data. And many sections of your EL and special education courses were under-enrolled and frankly under-monitored for effectiveness. I did not see evidence of a co-teaching model in West Contra Costa. So it appears anyway that instead of the co-teaching model, this push out model, it has been preferred. And that's something I think that needs to be examined. There is evidence that pushing students out of tier 1 to receive support is a preferred method of instructional delivery in West Contra Costa. And I think this will be a priority for you guys moving forward to take a look at that. So my recommendations are that you need to align special education, English learner, and general education. And there can't be 3 different ways that you're casting excellence about balanced literacy. Of course, we need to accommodate special education students in the tier 1 environment. Of course, we need to focus more on language for English learners in the tier 1 environment, but they should all be moving in the same direction under the West Contra Costa way of being. There should be a significant statement of the way in which you do business. And all of these divisions should be working and swimming in the same direction. I would prioritize tier 1 access and support rather than pushing kids out of tier 1. I would consider a co-teaching model with appropriate professional learning for special education and general education teaching teams. I would create English learner course sequences that are aligned to UC A to G outcomes. You know what? There is no reason that a student who comes to you in 9th grade not speaking English should not be on track to go into college. And if any of you would like to see examples of how course sequencing can happen, that's very supportive in 6-period systems or 4x4s, I can provide those models. I would ensure each pathway provides students and guardians with clear sequencing options, like the parents get to see what that sequencing is going to look like. I would utilize your summer school or just summer in general as a means for providing acceleration for kids who are behind. So why do they have to leave for the summer? Why can't that time be utilized? Not in non-A to G coursework or non-graduation required coursework, but really like co-taught rich experiences where kids can be on track for college. And I'm certainly not saying that every child is going to college, but what I'm saying is they should make that decision at the end of year 4. We shouldn't make that for them based on our opinion or our judgment that they're not going to make it. We need to move all the boulders and give them every possible opportunity to make it. And then if they decide that they want to do a career or go to 2-year college, that's fine, but we haven't decided that for them. So I would really utilize summer to get that done. And then I would monitor the academic outcomes of students in special education and EL support sections, as well as general education interventions. So if you're going to spend all this money on sections where you're pushing kids out of tier 1 and you're not spending the money on co-teachers pushing in, how do we know that those sections are effective? And I don't just mean like we've checked a box and they graduate. That's a floor level requirement. Are they learning at higher rates and mastering competencies at higher rates being shoved out of tier 1 instruction? And if that's happening, great. Don't mess with what's working. But I would really look at that. And I think a monitoring piece needs to go in to do that. I would also monitor the number of students transitioning to alternative schools, charter schools, or changing status to non-diploma bound in grades 11 and 12, because we know what we see sometimes is that grade 11 comes and all of a sudden we've got these kids and we're like, oh goodness, they're not going to make it. So they start having their IEP designation changed to non-diploma bound so that they can get a certificate. And I'm not saying that a student shouldn't have that opportunity. I'm saying that, have we done everything humanly possible in the tier 1 environment with the supports that kids need and the summer and opportunities before we take those steps? And also sometimes kids start transferring out of schools in grade 11. So the graduation rates of the school tend sometimes to look higher than they actually are because the kids are in a different cost center in a different school. And I would really look at that. And I'm not saying the kids shouldn't go to alternative schools or they shouldn't have an opportunity to be non-diploma bound. I'm saying you might want to look at those traveling patterns if you want to disrupt any inequities. And again, I already shared why the leaky pipeline review of data is so important and might be something that you take on to see with one of your graduation classes. Finding 9 is the need to provide strategic and aggressive instructional options to respond to declining enrollment and staffing gaps. So the district is experiencing declining enrollment and loss of ADA. There are many under-enrolled schools in the system. Many Black families have left the district for hilltop charters. I heard that a lot when I was walking the schools. And the district has returned to in-person learning with limited alternatives. There's a very limited online learning program in place in West Contra Costa, and there's no option, no K-12 option to offer families if they don't want in-person learning or are considering charters for a variety of reasons. There just don't seem to be enough robust district options for parents who want something different than the brick and mortar school. I also did not see cluster alignment. So when I say cluster, I mean like the elementary, the middle, and the high school. And therefore, I didn't really see a robust cluster marketing strategy. So in some of my elementary conversations, I asked the parents about high school. So are you planning to attend, the high school in your area? And some of them knew a lot about the high school in their area and were like, absolutely. And others of them are like, I'm not really sure. And so I think that that might be something to think about, how to have a cluster meeting or have regular cluster engagement so that it's a pipeline and they're really getting to know the next level or getting excited about the next level so that you can retain them. I didn't see evidence of next generation science standards in the elementary school, and I didn't see evidence of pathway alignment or expansion in K-6. So what I mean by that is I was really looking for robust STEM and NGSS experiences in the elementary, because you see that a lot now across the state in California. And I think that's an area that you might want to spend some time talking about. Are there going to be any connective tissues in your elementaries to the pathway or STEM work that's happening in middle and high school? And if so, what does that look like? How will those next generation science standards and experiences be alive in your elementary school experience? And current facility sharing situations, I would especially keep my eye on Pinole Middle. That situation could be setting the community and the district up for some issues that are going to need to be addressed. You have two schools sharing that site, yet, one is a I believe either a charter or a magnet, and the other one is a district school. And there is no, agreement that when the kids from one side get to, let's say, 6th grade, that they will go into Pinole in 7th grade. And the K-6 school, I believe, is expanding. So the question I would ask you is, how will the community perceive if their only option at their only middle school is a charter option? Will they accept that? And is that ultimately what is happening at Pinole? I'm not saying that it is, but I think there needs to be some conversations about that. And I had the opportunity of visiting Pinole Middle and engaging with like a very, very creative and skilled principal. And I think maybe sitting, them down or having a conversation about, with the community, what is actually happening at Pinole, and will there always be a charter option and a public option, or is the plan for one of those options to overtake the other? I think you have to address that. The district has hired a communications firm to help with messaging and marketing, and I know that work has already started. So, I think you guys might consider what are the alternative means to in-person learning? Like, maybe there needs to be a robust virtual school, and I think that's okay. If some people don't want to attend in-person learning, maybe they just want their kid to be in online school the whole way, K-12. Is that okay? And might that be an option that keeps some families in your district and in turn raises your ADA? I would also look at a standards-based K-12 online curriculum. Could you offer something all the way from top to bottom? And you could sit down with your unions and your teachers and really investigate some of that. I would consider the designation of an online virtual school rather than an online program. Maybe there's a separate cost center where folks can just opt in to a school experience that is completely virtual. Develop a communication strategy to retain current students and capture the lost students. Bring them back, give them some amazing options that might bring them back to the door, and adjust site allocations to match declining enrollment. You can't keep staffing schools at similar rates if their enrollment is declining, because as that'll put a strain on the budget. Examine current facility sharing agreements and upcoming facility efforts. I would look at this very carefully. Again, back to the Pinole situation. Align school cluster programs. Collaborate with unions to examine the impacts of certain agreements on staffing schools. Like, there were some interesting agreements that were shared with me that the timelines would have made it very difficult for some of the staffing adjustments that you do after your fourth Friday. And then develop MOUs as appropriate to ease contractual restraints if you and the unions agree that some of the things that are in writing might be creating problems both for the district, the union, the sites, etc. But doing this all really collaboratively, I think it's something to consider. Finding number 10 is the need to provide professional learning in response to ongoing student learning data points. And I want to be really clear here. A lot of research shows us that ultimately top-down, forced down professional learning is just not impactful. So I want to be clear that what I mean here is that the group, as Michael Fullen says, the group changes the group. So creating opportunities for teachers to work alongside of administrators, to work alongside of the district office, to co-create experiences where people feel success and they take on the new learning in a different way than when it's pushed down on them. So I just wanted to clarify that before I started this particular finding. So interviews, site visits, artifact review, and emails revealed that staff want opportunities to improve their work skills and promote. There isn't an aspiring administrator or other leadership capacity building opportunity. Site leaders expressed frustration with being required to attend in-person professional development when their sites were not fully staffed. And I got to tell you, there was a principal who was still teaching a 6th grade class herself, but was required to attend in-person PD. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have professional learning, even though you're in the middle of a COVID whirlwind. But I mean, she was teaching 6th grade. Yeah. So several site leaders expressed a desire to attend virtual PD until staffing was complete. Principals expressed a desire to collaborate more with each other. Some site staff expressed a belief that professional learning feels top down and based on a need to meet compliance or the appearance of collaboration. There was little evidence of balanced literacy at the high school level. Many schools provided support to students in push-out models. While there is evidence that principals were asked to provide input on professional development in a meeting in August, it does not appear that visits to each site were conducted to inform professional development needs. What I mean by that is that, you know, many people from central office coming down to a site, going and walking through principals' sites with them, sitting with them, talking to them about needs. It doesn't feel like that happened consistently across the sites. And parents expressed a desire for staff to learn about their culture and their people. And I think that really resonated from my interviews, that if you're going to be a teacher in, or just a staff member in a school, you need to have a desire to learn about the backgrounds and the culture of the kids that are going to school there. And I will tell you, as a principal, I experienced this myself, where I underestimated my own understanding and my staff's understanding of the community we were serving. I put all these kids on a bus to the beach to work with the Surfrider Foundation in San Diego. And we were going to pick up garbage, and they were going to have an experience that was aligned to their project-based learning. And I made assumptions that because many of my kids had grown up in San Diego, and we were, 3 miles from the beach, that they had seen the ocean. They had not seen the ocean. Many of them had never left their communities. And when they arrived at the beach, in addition to just sort of like the realization that I had not done my homework, I felt a little ashamed at the fact that I did not know this. And it showed that I needed to understand the community that I was serving better, because obviously the beach wasn't the only thing that I was missing. Just another aside, I used to send kids from my school on these college trips all the way from San Diego up to Eureka, and to expose them to colleges. Well, what I did not understand, and I thought I was doing a good thing, and I think I was doing a good thing, but I didn't understand that so many of these kids hadn't traveled and hadn't left their families, that they didn't stay at the colleges I got them into, not because they couldn't do the work, but because they were homesick. And because I didn't understand the culture before I took them on these adventures, my staff and I didn't do a good enough job matching them to places where they wouldn't leave and they would complete college. So I found all of that out in a UCLA study that they did on my school. And so it's really important for us to understand more than the surface of what we think we know about our communities when we're serving them. So the recommendations here are, I would use classroom walkthrough data to inform professional learning experiences. I would co-create professional learning opportunities, both with staff at the site, but also co-create a professional learning plan for the system. I would adjust professional development to meet the needs of school clusters if necessary. So if there are understaffed clusters that are struggling just to get their classes covered, the professional development for them, the delivery model might look a little different during the time that they're struggling. I would collaborate with staff and union teacher leaders to create district-wide diagnostic course assessments. I would provide professional learning on the use of universal screeners, diagnostic assessments, and formative and summative data. And this one's really important because just putting data down in front of people is not professional learning. And just having them sit and analyze it is not professional learning. What we need to teach them to do is what to do with the data. So once they see the data, most principals can tell, oh, I've got, 50% of my kids are not reading at grade level. But what do we do with the data? And we need to model for our leaders what to do and work alongside them in the what's the next, what steps do we take next? Make the teaching of balanced literacy a priority at the secondary level. Monitor and discuss the effectiveness of push out versus push in services at sites. Encourage principals to meet monthly at each level to align best practices, right? They want to work with each other. So maybe, and I know some clusters or levels were doing this, they had certain meetings, but uniform it. Encourage them to take that time to work with each other. Provide opportunities for central office staff new to West Contra Costa to shadow an experienced principal for 2 weeks as part of their onboarding. So if you're bringing people in from the outside and you want them to understand the West Contra Costa way, they need to go live it, right? Some people have come from other districts and they don't have any sense of the West Contra Costa way. And one way to do that might be to provide an onboarding experience that requires some level of them spending time on the ground. And then create an aspiring administrators program, not only to build the capacity of your future leaders, but to identify them. Who are you ready to move up if there's a retirement or if you have an opening? Knowing your people and what their desires are for their next step is hugely important. Finding 11 was the need to expand weighted and UC equivalent options for students. So I'm not saying these didn't exist. One high school offers IB, and it appears that most of the college courses are part of the middle college program. While all high school sites offer at least one AP course, the pass rates overall do not appear to be high. Some CTE courses are articulated to the college. In some schools, college options at the high school appear to be something you do after you complete your graduation requirements rather than dual credit options. And given, just the shortage in teachers and different things, you might sit with your unions and investigate the ability for kids to earn high school graduation credits through some of these dual enrollment programs. So a lot of districts in California will allow kids to take Black or Chicano studies at the community college and let it count for US history. So there are lots of ways to expand offerings and to take advantage of some of those alternative means. College-aligned support courses like AVID do not appear to be utilized to support advanced studies. There does not appear to be public reporting on AP/IB college enrollment, test taking rates, and test passing rates. So this one is an interesting one. I would suggest strongly that you create a report where you look at who's enrolled in the courses, how many of them actually take the test, and how many of them actually pass the test. Because for AP, if you're taking the course, let's say, and you're hoping that your score on it will be accepted by some of the colleges. There are colleges now that won't accept scores that aren't at 4. So that's something you may want to watch. And the staff in West Contra Costa believes there is a language other than English in Spanish, a language other than English test in Spanish, but there does not appear to be sort of like a system stance or identity around a student's language as a weighted strength. I would seriously look at load exams, language other than English exams, in languages outside of Spanish. Because think about it. Okay, let's say that I'm an English learner and my home language is a language you don't offer in your district, but I have a language requirement, for UC or whatever. I might have to be learning English and take a third language to meet the world language requirement. Instead, the University of California offers like 8 or 9 different ways to qualify for language. And one of them is a language other than English exam, where you test out at the second year level, which is the graduation level. And then that either helps you accelerate into a higher course, or it helps you open up space in your schedule to support you with your mastery of English. So it's just another sort of strategy or tool in the tool belt that you can use to help kids obtain more weighted and UC equivalent options. So I would expand your dual enrollment program, expand your CTE articulated course program, establish an alternative means policy that allows graduation credit for other courses besides in the course of study. I would monitor the enrollment overall and by subgroup, test taking and test passing rates of students in AP and IB programs. I would look at the delta between the district's stance on equity and access and outcomes in your weighted courses. So are the outcomes equitable in your weighted courses? And do all kids have the same access? I would monitor that constantly. I would add a course like AVID to support students who may be taking a weighted option for the first time. That gives them that first generation college support. I would study and implement the many ways that the UC system accepts credit for world language. I would create your LOTs and I would administer your language other than English tests in 7th grade so that you can identify who needs to be accelerated and who might need to meet the credit so that they can open up their schedules for more of that literacy and English mastery support that they might need. Finding 12 is the need to study the student learning impacts of positive outliers. So there are promising practices in West Contra Costa that should be studied with student data and enrollment outcomes and replicated if they prove to be viable. For example, the Internationals program at Richmond High is attempting to offer EL instruction in a Tier 1 UC-A-to-G environment. Also, Richmond High is implementing wall-to-wall linked learning. West Contra Costa was one of the initial 9 linked learning implementation districts. I wonder, is there something to study and support there? So they might be structurally implementing linked learning, but do they need instructional support within the linked learning environment to accelerate student outcomes? The middle college should be studied. How can more kids experience what is happening at the middle college without proficiency admission requirements? The Michelle Obama School implemented a unique facility model. Do you know if it's working? Has it been studied? Parents at Madera know they have a great school. How can every school like Madera how could every school be like Madera? And what will it take for parents to feel the same way about their school that people feel about Madera? And what can be studied there? What are the things that could be replicated? And student and enrollment data will reveal where things are working and provide a roadmap for you to go out and observe. So what does data tell us about those positive outliers? So my recommendations are that you determine positive outliers. Every time you put data up or you look at summative or any performance data, where are you seeing people doing things either at a grade level or in a school that you start to go, what's happening there? And how can you study it to see what can be replicated? Examine the alignment with the district's mission, vision, and core values to these positive outliers, and consider the technical changes that would be necessary and the relational implications if you're going to make any changes. And that's where you and your unions would sit down and obviously talk through this before you would do anything. We're almost done. Finding 13, the need to establish a balance between site autonomy and central office oversight. Interviews, site visits, and artifact review reveal that sites have considerable autonomy, and that is making it difficult to ensure equality across the system. One example of this is the contracting of supplemental services. A review of the contracting expenses of sites reveals that rather than bringing principals together to discuss and align services that might benefit the system, the principals are contracting these services individually. This also has potential fiscal implications, as pooling the purchase may save the district money. It also puts the purchase on the perspective of a leader, rather than the proven analysis of impact and alignment to current district systems and services. This is also evident in how classes are selected and sequenced both in schools and in the clusters. Many stakeholders commented that the quality of the school, special education, and other programs is completely dependent upon the site leader. One central office manager said, "Everyone is rowing their own canoe." So my recommendations in this area are to clearly define site autonomy through district procedures. And this, an example of a framework that you might use here is the loose tight leadership framework. So in a loose tight situation, there are just clear expectations at the district level, but there are certain things that that the site is able to do on their own. So for example, I'll give you like at a loose practice would be grade level and or content area teams collaborate to review and discuss instruction. So that's a loose measure. Grade level and or content areas collaborate to review and discuss instruction. But a tight practice would be instruction will be guided by best practice, grounded in rigor, relationships, and relevance. So in the second example, the district is saying you can collaborate the way that you want, but it needs to be around best practice, rigor, relevance, and relationships. And it's not as loose as the first example where they could just collaborate. There was more guidance given. I would utilize the executive directors as the primary oversight of principals. I would conduct weekly instructional and operational joint meetings to review site requests, conditions, and needs, and align all operational efforts to instructional efforts. So we know that instructional cabinets sometimes meet, but what about that cross cabinet meeting where the operations side of the house gets to understand what the instructional pushes are so that they can align the things that they're doing operationally. I would encourage principals to meet by level to discuss and align materials and methods. I would support the purchasing of materials and adoptions across the system to ensure equity. And I would consider a tiered professional development system for site leaders that is a mixture of role-alike triads where they can learn from each other, one-on-one visits with the ED, and quarterly all leader opportunities. And I think you're beginning to roll some of those things out already. And finding 14 is the need for authentic and transparent communication practices. Interviews, surveys, site visits, and artifact review revealed that poor communication is the root cause of many issues. Stakeholders used words like disrespected, abusive, and exhausted when describing interactions with the district. Many stakeholders described as a desire to engage with student outcome data and participate in meaningful processes aligned to LCAP and strategic planning processes. Site leaders shared that an updated org chart was not shared. Stakeholders want to have difficult conversations about important issues. And the history of the school board election and representation has left a bit of a residue of suspicion. There is fear of union leaders, but a desire to collaborate effectively with them. Union members described having to ask to be on things like interview panels. So what I'm recommending here, and I think this is such an important and enormous finding, is that I would clearly define what excellent customer service looks like and sounds like within the district. I would expect across the district that culture might include that 24 hours is the most that a person would need to wait to receive some type of feedback when they reach out, whether that's a principal reaching out to a district office member, a parent reaching out to a teacher reaching out to central office, that there is some urgency around getting back to people, and not just getting back and saying, I'll get back to you, but actually getting back to them with what they asked, or facilitating the connection to someone who can get them the information that they're looking for. I would identify silos that are creating roadblocks or barriers to efficient response times to sites. So the sites, they'll tell you who will pick up the phone right away and who will get them what they need quickly. And they will also tell you who does not. So this is known. And I think that just starting with some basic engagement expectations, and then management making sure that that's being enacted. I would provide translation service in every home language. If you can't afford it in-house, perhaps look at your university partners to help you, or some agencies. I would provide professional development to the translators before they translate. One of the things that I heard from stakeholders that I thought was so interesting is that the translation's great, but if the translator doesn't understand the context of what they're translating, then the concept and the idea doesn't translate as cleanly. I thought that was such an interesting comment that was made, because it's so true. If you're just translating the words, sometimes you don't always fully understand the intention, the educational concept or idea. And then I would create a one-stop communication location for administrators, one message center that they get their messages from, and one place they go, and that person or that place is responsible for making sure that principals get what they need as quickly as they possibly can. I would also streamline and integrate some of your technology processes, and I already know that your chief technology officer is all over this. She has presented to the board some of the things that she's planning to do, and so I think that's well on its way. I would hire a communications staff member who's responsible for updating and monitoring district and site websites. Your managers are updating their own websites. And so I kind of think, how does that create consistent messaging? And do managers and divisions really have time to be updating the website? So maybe you have a webmaster and people give their webmaster the information so there's some consistent way of messaging. I would also send a weekly or bi-monthly communication, which could include short video messages to students and families that could be accessed on the district website. I would create and implement timelines for the LCAP process and other stakeholder engagement. I would regularly acknowledge the work of staff, students, and families who go the extra mile. And I'll tell you, this can kind of, like, when things are, when you're in the whirlwind and you guys are in the COVID whirlwind, this can kind of get, pushed to the side. one of the things that I loved about what the San Diego Unified School Board did is they always had at the beginning of every meeting, the area soup, or what you would call your executive directors, would bring forward some special program or do some honoring of folks in their cluster at the board meeting. And that would be the first item on the agenda, would be to hear from kids doing something amazing, or honor teachers, or honor the work of a coach, or just something to start the meeting off by acknowledging the work of staff, students, and families. And then I would design and implement a quarterly meeting with external partnerships focused on collective impact work. You have a lot of partnerships in the region that want a meaningful relationship with you, but a lot of their experiences are siloed. So they might work with this person in this department on this, or this person. You need somebody to take the helm of your partnerships and organize them, meet with them, align their work. You're in such a rich community of resources, and I think West Contra Costa could really benefit from utilizing all that support. So I realize that I am not going to be able to take questions live since I taped this. But what's going to happen is that I am going to open up a Google Doc for the board members, and all of their questions based on this presentation is going to go into the Google Doc. And then I'm going to extract those questions or comments, and I am going to respond to them again in a recorded Zoom, so that the community has my answers to those questions, as well as this recording. So I really appreciate your time. I know this may have been awkward that this is a video, but with everything going on, this was the best that we could do. And I look forward to the questions that may come because of this. And I would just like to close by saying, this is an equity assessment that is going to take years to implement. You cannot implement all of the recommendations all at once. And so one of the things that the superintendent and I will be discussing as he enters the strategic planning is how to work with the executive team who is doing everything they can to make sure that the strategic planning process is really meaningful for all of you. We'll be working together to figure out, like, what are the priorities and what order will some of this happen in. So thank you. And I will see you in the next recorded video.